This podcast is sponsored by Choreo Voicemail for Inmates. Choreo is committed to lowering recidivism through family communication by providing voice, text, and email services to incarcerated men and women. For more information, please visit Choreo at CORRIOSPC.org.
Welcome to the Prison Pod, a podcast for all people experiencing incarceration. The mission of this podcast is to save lives, restore hope, reduce suffering, and recidivism. Many show ideas come directly from the listeners, so please write the host. Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine, 04473. Here is your host, Ms. Valerie.
Well, hello everyone, and thank you for having us back on the Prison Pod. Today we are so fortunate to have a great guest. We have Judge Nancy Margaret Russo joining us from Ohio, and we've never had a judge before. So I'm a little bit nervous, but I'm also very excited. I'm going to start right off, Nancy, by asking if you can tell us a little bit about what a common plea judge is.
So in Ohio, a common pleas judge is a state court judge, and we sit in our counties. We're trial court judges, and I'm in what's called the general division. So that means I handle civil cases, so car accidents, medical malpractice, medical, legal malpractice, contracts, business disputes, collections, but then foreclosures as well, and then criminal cases. We have co-jurisdiction over misdemeanors with the city courts, but then we also have sole jurisdiction over felonies, lowest level all the way through capital murder.
Does Ohio have a death penalty?
Yes.
They do, okay. I'm curious what your favorite type of cases are.
I like criminal cases. I really enjoy them because I think for a judge, it's a place where you can make a big difference in people's lives. If there's a victim and a defendant, you can impact both sides. If it's a non-victim crime, you can certainly impact the defendant. It's a place to make change, I think, and to not just make communities safer in the moment, but to also try to rehabilitate from the bench, try to come up with conditions and things if you're doing probation or supervision that are going to help people get on their feet and not be in the system again. I love the trial court because for me, it's a place where a judge can make the most difference.
I love that. Beautiful. And what is the most difficult part of your job as a judge?
Well, the most difficult part for me, and I think the most difficult part that should be for every judge, no matter where they are, if you're handling criminal cases, it should be sentencing. I tell new judges all the time that the day that you feel good sending somebody to prison is the day you need to go. It should always take a piece of you out, even when you have to do it, even when you know that the crime calls for it. It should never make you happy. It should never bring you pleasure. It should never make you feel powerful. It is something that is very heavy if you take this job seriously.
Thank you for that. That is a great comment. So how many years have you been doing this work?
I'm in my 26th year.
Wow. Yeah. I want to make mention that you have been named Judge of the Year by Parents of Murdered Children and Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and you've also received a real award. And I like this because this award is given in appreciation to you for your dedication to connectivity, which is to the community, which is wonderful, collaboration and community. And those are really great things for our leaders to be recognized for. So I thank you for that type of work coming out of your state. So do you do a lot of work now with reentry court?
Yes, I founded the reentry court here in Cuyahoga County. It was the first one in Ohio. I had it created out of nothing, 2007. It was an idea that came through the federal government. A grant was given to us, and my name was literally pulled out of a hat. That's how I got chosen. And the administrator just said, okay, your name got pulled, go do it. And so I had to create it, and I'm still presiding over it now in 2024. So we have a wonderful program. It's the most successful program that I've been able to find, 93% success rate, and we follow people for 3 years after they graduate, and saved over $12 million for Ohio taxpayers. But the most important statistic is 650 years not served in prison.
That's great. And this is one of the things that many of our states are addressing, is the recidivism rates have been so high in so many, in the programs, there's not enough of them.
Right.
It's not that they don't exist, there's just not enough of them. Can you explain a little bit how reentry court works?
Sure. Reentry court in our jurisdiction is open to anybody who's statutorily eligible for judicial release. And what judicial release is basically the interruption of a prison term. So let's say somebody goes to prison for 3 years. After a certain period of time, 180 days, they can apply for what's called judicial release. They used to call it ship and shock, where you would go to prison and then get probation. Now it's called judicial release. It's rare. Most judges don't grant it because they've made a decision about the sentencing. And in the past, before the reentry court phenomenon, there really wasn't a lot of insight into how to supervise. And so we take applications. We created an application that's on our website. If anybody's interested in it, they can go to the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas website, click the box for reentry court, and then you can see the form. It's an application. That does not get filed on the docket, but it's a way for somebody to apply without filing a motion. Otherwise, they can file a motion by themselves, pro se, or they can hire a lawyer. I set the program up specifically that they don't need to spend any money to apply. And that's important because usually when people are in prison, their families are struggling, and coming up with money to hire a lawyer to do a judicial release motion is a big deal. So the application doesn't cost anything. You can file the motion yourself. Doesn't cost anything. And if you don't have a lawyer and you come into the program, I will assign you indigent counsel, so you never have to pay anything to get into this program. And
That's really...
yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
That's really great because so many programs are cost preventative.
Right. And I'm always really dismayed by the number of lawyers who are taking money from people and filing these motions before they're even eligible under the law. I can't even tell you how many of those I see. So that's disturbing. I don't know why lawyers would do that, and if they don't know the law and the rules, then they need to learn them. And if they do know it and they're still taking the money, then that's a whole separate problem. But so once the person either applies or files a motion, our judges, we have 34 judges, they can opt in or opt out. 32 of our 34 judges participate in it, which means that I review all of their motions and all of the applications that come in. And then I have a vetting process that's been developed over the years. And if you make it through all the eligibility, I will do an interview with you, usually by video or by phone. And then if I decide that the person is a great fit, I ask their judge whether or not they want to bring them into my program. And if the judge says yes, then they get transferred to my docket and I hold the hearing. If the judge says no, then I just send the information on to that judge, and that judge can either grant the motion, but they don't get any of the privileges of reentry court, or they can deny the motion.
So when somebody goes through this program and they're released, are they like a supervised release, like wearing a monitor or probation parole type situation?
Yeah, it's kind of interesting. We do some things the same for everybody. For most people that have been in, particularly for a violent crime, because I take people with what we call felony ones in Ohio, which are the highest level felony other than an unclassified murder. So you could have a gun case, I've had people with involuntary manslaughter, all kinds of, aggravated robbery. So if you've been in there and you have a violent case, for the most part, I'll put you on GPS for a little bit. And that's really because we're trying to transition you home. We recognize that this transition into prison is very stressful and traumatizing, and coming home is also stressful and traumatizing. So although I have many ideas about what we can do about the going in part, I can't control that, but I can control the coming out part. So we create an umbrella of support. We start with usually once a week reporting. Everybody does that for a while. Then they taper off to twice a month, and then once a month, and then they do group every month with us. I think the thing that's most exciting about what we've done is our form of supervision is radically different than most supervision, and it came around by accident. What we have is I have one PO dedicated to my reentry court. Her office, I had her office built around the corner from my chambers, so our reentry court clients have access to us all the time. If they report, they're reporting right around the corner from my office. If they want to see me, all they have to do is tell the PO they want to talk to me. If they need anything, the PO is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week by text and cell phone. And we are responsive. If there's a crisis, we're responding. I've had people call me from crack houses. I've had people call me from the hospital. Whatever it is, we're there to try to support them. And then we interact as much as we can with their families.
I think that's a pretty uncommon thing for judges, though. Am I right on that?
Yeah.
Is this a little above and beyond, right?
Yeah, I have to say that one of the great benefits for me in reentry court is it's helped me be a better judge. It's just helped me be a better judge. I teach in the prisons now. I developed a class for people coming home, and I also teach reentry issues in the prisons. And I learned from them. I've learned a lot about trauma-informed sentencing. I've learned a lot about what questions to ask. I've learned better how to support somebody, whether they're on straight probation or they're coming out of prison. Those are conversations that I think every judge in the country should be having with people that are incarcerated or on probation. I always call my reentry people my consultants. I tell them all the time, you're my consultants, you're my ambassadors. You teach me and I'll help you.
They have the first-hand information. I've been saying this for years, that we need to have all people at the table when these conversations happen, because they're the directly involved people. And if we don't hear from them, how can we make decisions that are going to help them? We need their input. We need to know what works and what does not work. Or sometimes it might be something that we've never even thought of.
Right, right.
The other thing that I loved was when I saw a video, and I don't know where it was, it might have been a newspaper article, that you were going into the prisons and teaching. I about fell off my chair. I was just floored by that. And my heart glowed, because this is one thing I fully believe. You cannot work with people without going to where they're at. Mm-hmm. And you cannot understand a prison without going into one. I worked inside as a volunteer for 20 years. And there's certain smells, there's sounds, there's lack of color, so many things that you are affected by just by going into the prison itself. It can give you such a different perspective of just the living space itself and how that can affect people's mental health.
Right. The one thing that's interesting you brought up about mental health, because we had a really good success rate, like in the 80s, 80%, 85 percentile, and I really do use these people's comments to heart. I take them to heart. So I'll ask every group, do you have any suggestions, things we should do different, things we're not doing for you that you need so I can make the program better? And I remember this woman said to me, she was a highly educated woman. She was both a lawyer and a pharmacist, and she had committed a crime and had been in prison, and she was released through my program. And she said, Judge, what I really need I need psychology. I need someone, a therapist, and I can't find anybody. Well, I thought, that's interesting. So I went on a hunt to try to find anybody to help, and I couldn't. I went to the schools here, and nobody was interested in it. And so then we found some nonprofits that offered it, and I made that a condition. A couple years ago, I started that. where everybody coming out has to do a minimum number of psychological counseling sessions. And I got nervous because I thought, oh, the men are going to be mad at me. I had this preconceived notion that the men were going to be hands off. And, I shouldn't have thought that, as it was just a perception. And I was wrong. They loved it. And the men, in particular, go a lot longer, I think, because it's the first time they've really had the opportunity to talk. And when I did that, our success rate went up into the mid-90s, just with that change.
That's unreal. That's just the thing, too. That's a lot of why I record a lot of the people's stories, because a lot of people need to tell their stories, and they need to be able to say what they need. And
right.
We need to listen.
Right. I have to say that there's a lot of talk these days about criminal justice reform, and I don't get real excited about it, and I'll tell you why. I hear a lot about bail, and yes, there's things in bail that needed to be changed and have been changed, but I don't hear anything about the people in prison, and I don't hear anything about the people coming home from prison, and I don't hear anything about people being denied parole. So for me, if you're going to talk about criminal justice reform, you need to open your scope wider than pretrial bail. That's such a tiny, tiny piece that needs reforming. And I get frustrated because I feel that people who have an interest in it aren't looking long enough down the road. They're not seeing the whole range of things that happen when someone gets in the criminal justice system.
Well, it's not just a job. You are, in some ways, being responsible for someone's life and society.
Right.
So you need to take it seriously, and you need to look at all aspects.
Right. And I do think that as communities, we could do more simple things. Why don't we, as part of criminal justice reform, create programs that help people transition going into prison? Giving them more information about what to expect, what the programming is, how to go through the assessment process. Why are we not doing more support services for when they come home? Because very few people are going to have the advantage of a reentry court. Why are we not doing that? Why are we not providing psychological counseling while they're in the prison to help address the underlying trauma that caused the behavior to begin with? There's so many things we could do to help reduce the recidivism rate and protect the community at the same time, and bring our neighbors home to be successful.
Right. Yeah, and a lot of programs for reentry are only like the last 6 months, where it should be right when they walk through the door. I mean, most people come into prison with problems already.
Right.
Whether it's substance use or violence within their own home, lack of education, opportunity. It's not everybody, but a lot of it is. And those things need to be addressed.
Yeah, we could do a better job of that. As a system, I think we can do a better job. And I think we could do a better job of educating judges in how to inquire, perhaps, how to talk to people in a way where we're asking not what happened in this situation, not what happened the night of the robbery, for example, but what happened to you? What happened to you that caused you to think that this was behavior that you wanted to engage in? Let's dig a little deeper. Let's find out about what was going on, because if we can get to the trauma, if we can get to the break, then we can better support people to heal. But if we never ask the question, then we're just putting Band-Aids on gaping wounds.
Right. And trauma is such a huge thing, because people, if they haven't experienced trauma before coming into the system, just the experience, the whole arrest, going through the processing, going through the court, and then being sentenced, that in itself is traumatizing, but then being sent to prison on top of it. Right. Especially if, I would imagine, the younger you are, the harder it is.
Mm-hmm.
Have you done juvenile court?
I have not.
So you work strictly with adults?
Right. Well, I have had bind-over juveniles where they've been starting in juvenile court and they get bound over as adults, 17 years old, 16 years old.
Okay. And so they can be tried as an adult at 17?
Right, if they go through this bind-over process, but that's a decision made by the juvenile court judge. whether or not to bind them over to adult court.
And I'm just curious, and I apologize because you just said you don't work with juveniles, but I'm wondering, does the state sentence, do you know, life without parole for juveniles?
I haven't had a murder with a juvenile. I honestly can't tell you. If I didn't look that up, I wouldn't know. If as juveniles, they can't. If they're prosecuted in juvenile court, it can only be, I think, till they're 21, they stay in detention. But I don't have any reason to believe that if you were convicted of an aggravated murder that you couldn't get the full adult sentence, because they get full adult sentences in anything else if they're bound over.
Okay. Now I'm going to ask a total different question.
Sure.
How long does a judge serve? Do you have a term like other officials, or is it something once you're a judge, you're always a judge?
We run every 6 years, unless we run for another seat. But each term is 6 years. And that's true of the trial court, the municipal court, the appellate courts, and the Supreme Court.
And are you going up for re-election?
I am within my own division. So I'm not running for my own seat. I'm running for a seat that's being vacated by another judge who's retiring. And the reason I'm doing that is I have 3 years left on my term, but I want to get the extra 4 years because I'm working on some things in Rancho that mean a lot to me, and I want to get it done.
I love hearing that.
I want to keep working.
I love hearing that. Reentry is really a huge focus here in Maine right now, and we're really, really working on that. We've got some great things going on in this state. I think we're pretty progressive considering we're stuck up here in the corner in no man's land. But
one of my favorite places. I could live in Maine. My fantasy vacation is a house on the beach in Maine in the winter.
Oh, you know, it's so cool that you say winter, because we actually lived at Old Orchard Beach for a while, and I loved it in the winter, and people said, why did you like it in the winter? Because you can still walk there, there's no snow, and it's beautiful, just beautiful. So now we have a couple of questions that have nothing to do with work.
Sure. I
want to know what you do to practice self-care.
I'm not good at that.
Uh-oh. None of us are.
I could do some work on my self-care.
Do you have a hobby or something that you like to go, or a favorite place?
I rescued schnauzers, so I've been very active in animal rescue, and I have 4 right now. So they keep me kind of busy. And I volunteer in the prisons by teaching my program, so that is really for me a kind of self-care because I enjoy it. It energizes me. I like doing volunteer work. I've done it all my life in one form or another. I like to walk. I like to be in nature. I think that's one of the reasons I like the East Coast so much. That's my favorite part of the country. If somebody said I'll give you a house in New England or I'll give you a house in California, I would absolutely pick New England. I don't care about the bad weather. There's something about it that's, I don't know, I just love the history. I love the environment. I love the nature. So I like being outside.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've lived in Maine all my life. And if you ever have the opportunity to go to Acadia State Park in Bar Harbor. Oh, you have?
Yeah.
So no wonder you love Maine, because that's a little piece of paradise that is here.
Yeah. York Beach. I stayed in York Beach. I drove all the way up through Nova Scotia.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, I loved it. Great.
It's a very big state when you start driving
it's
it.
Beautiful.
And it's almost like 3 different states as you go north.
Right.
Yeah. So another question I want to ask is, do you have a favorite book?
I love reading. So I would say the first one that pops in my mind is Lincoln in the Bardo. I'm a big fan of Abraham Lincoln. I've studied him since I was very, very young because my dad was very much into the Civil War and Lincoln, and I followed suit. And Lincoln in the Bardo is a fictionalized version of a story about Abraham Lincoln visiting the grave of his son when his son died while they were in the White House.
Oh, wow. I'll have to check that out. I always ask that because one of my biggest things that I advocate for is for people to read, no matter what it is, even if their reading is very minimal. If they could read children's books, even, or comic books. So I'm always interested, and sometimes someone will say, well, I heard that judge say she read this book and I'm going to read it. So that's why I asked that question.
Yeah, it's not a long book, but it's a very moving book. It's about grief and the afterlife and spirituality told through the lens of Lincoln and the spirits of the people who are already dead, who are watching Abraham Lincoln come in to visit his son.
I'm going to have to read that because I need a good piece of fiction. So is there any projects or anything that you do within your work that we haven't covered that you'd like our listeners to know about?
No, I think other than reentry encompasses a lot of things. So I've talked a little bit about how we do reentry. I would like to tell this one story because I think it's instructive. I came to the bench from the private sector, which is an unusual place to go into the judiciary. But I wanted to be a judge since I was 8 years old, so I focused myself on that. But I worked in insurance companies doing white-collar crime investigations and prosecutions. And so I have a kind of a customer service mentality, and that means that the public is my customer, the people in my courtroom, civil, criminal, are all my customers, and I'm trying to always develop what I call my product, my service. Am I doing a good job? Am I serving my public well? Which is why I always go to my customers, which are my litigants, or in reentry court, the defendants, and ask them, what can we do better? So when I first started this, like I said, there was no model for me to follow, and I hired a probation officer out of our probation department. They said, well, take one of our current POs. And it wasn't a good fit. The person was very law enforcement oriented, and I knew this wasn't going to work. So I said, no, send me another one. And then they sent me another one. I said, no, send me another one. And then they sent me a third one. I said, it's not going to work. And so I finally said, I'm going to do it myself. And the probation director said, you can't do that. And I said, why? And they said, you're not a probation officer. I said, I have a law degree and a master's degree. I think I can manage it. And I had an intern who wanted to be a probation officer. I said, she and I will do it together. We'll learn together. So what happened as a result of that was I certainly wasn't going to go to the probation department for Amanda and I to meet with these people. So they started coming into my chambers. And as soon as they started coming into my chambers, they started to really talk to me. That just being in my office made such a difference because they'd never been anywhere but in front of the bench. And that's where the idea came to build my PO's office right around the corner from my office. And to this day, if they want to talk to me, they come in my office. They sit down and sit with me in my office in the space that I sit in all day, and we have a conversation with each other. And it developed a kind of supervision that I never could have imagined by accident. But it's one of those examples of sometimes when things aren't working out and you're still looking for the answer, keep searching, because you may find a phenomenal response to the question that you're asking, and it's made all the difference in the world. And I've watched since probation generally start shifting to a more cooperative, collaborative supervision. And that's all of my probation is, I tell people, we're in this together. This is collaborative. I'm going to tell you things I want you to do because I think they're going to help, and you need to tell me if I'm not giving you the help that you need.
I've always felt that probation officers could be such a huge piece of the puzzle, and like all areas, they're overworked and understaffed and et cetera, because my thoughts are with a probation officer is if I'm on probation and I'm struggling, I should be able to pick up the phone and call them and say, I'm having a really stupid thoughts, I'm thinking about going out and doing this, or I've got this old girlfriend, I know she's bad for me, whatever. If they were comfortable enough to call them before an incident rather than having to see them at the county jail on a new arrest. But I find that most people are petrified of their probation officers. They don't want to go. Even the ones that are doing well still get almost sick going into that office. Just the whole... So I wish there was some type of mentorship that went with the probation hand in hand. I think it would be a better fit.
It's like ORAS. I'm sure you've heard of ORAS, these scoring things. From the very beginning, I don't use ORAS. I tell the probation department on my regular cases, you want to do it, fine, but don't attach it to my report because I'm going to have a conversation with the person. And ORAS is something that assigns numbers to people. And those numbers can drive people's decisions. I know some judges that look at that and decide, okay, then he must go to prison because of the score. Well, maybe not. Maybe you need to have a conversation, because when you start just using data without humanist conversation, you're going to make mistakes. And we make mistakes either way. I mean, no matter how hard we try, we're going to make mistakes. We're human. But I don't subscribe to just looking at scores. I think that it's damaging, and I also think it's demeaning, because I've had, certainly, again, people teach me this from the prisons, where they get a certain score when they get assessed, when they get in, it determines, everything that they're going to do, and then even though they do other things better, that score's still hanging in there somewhere. And at the very least, we should continually update it if we're going to use those kinds of instruments. But I think we have to be careful about labeling people.
Yeah, that was exactly what I thought of with the numbers. Is it's a label, even though it's a number and not a word. And I think that happens a lot. This is something else that I have thought of. Has the state addressed language used? They're trying to change... making our language person first rather than label first. So a person who has dealt with incarceration rather than a felon. Those types.
Yes, actually, it's interesting, because when we started Ranch Court in 2007, the first thing I did was say to my team, they are not defendants, they are clients. And they will be referred to throughout the program as clients. And whenever we discuss reentry court, it's clients. And it's been interesting how the word changes make a difference in how people see themselves. And it gives them a certain amount of confidence. And I will say the Ohio Department of Rehabilitation and Corrections, I think, is doing a good job on visiting language. And I know that there's a move on now for people to address people in prison as residents.
Yeah.
And
that's happened in Maine.
Yeah, words matter. They really do matter. How you address somebody matters. We have a lot of microaggression that goes on that maybe we don't intend, but it still hurts. I'm
curious how much you know about the prisons, but if there's any programs there. We have a program here that is... I'm not going to be able to remember the name of it. So it's, and they took a unit, and people that have been there for a long time that have done lots of programming. It's an earned living unit. So they earn the right to live in a unit that is more like rooms instead of cells. And they have a kitchen, and they have a living room area. They have an outdoor area they can go to, and gardens there. Do they have anything like that in Ohio yet?
Yes, the Grafton prisons that I teach at, there's two there, Grafton Reintegration and Grafton Correctional. They have big gardens and a lot of programming, but they have, in the last, I'd say, year and a half, opened up a dorm-like setting. It's very similar to what you're discussing. I toured it. I was very impressed with it. They have a kitchen area that has microwaves and sinks and things, and they have an open living room area with televisions and things like that. And it's an honor dorm. I think they call it an honor dorm, maybe. And their rooms become rooms. They're not considered cells. They're open. They can do different things inside them to personalize them. and the men wear a different uniform in it, shows that they're part of the honor dorm, more like street clothes. It's pretty interesting. I was really impressed with it. I have to say, I think the Department of Rehabilitation here is pretty innovative overall. They're very open to reentry. I work very closely with them because I'm in the prison so much. They're great partners for me. I couldn't do as good a job in reentry if I didn't have the help of the people at ODRC.
It's really great to hear that there's positive things happening. We hear so much negative about our prisons and our court systems, and the system's broken, and but there are so many out there that really are trying to make a change and make a difference in people's lives. It's just that we have to learn new ways of doing things. Things have been done the same way for a long time.
And I think that voters need to pay more attention to who they're voting for and ask these tough questions. How do you feel about reentry? How do you feel about people coming home? What kind of things are you going to do to support rehabilitation? What does it mean to you, rehabilitation? How do you hope to address recidivism? These are questions that people should be asked, whether they're at the executive branch, the legislative branch, or the judicial branch. Judges should be asked more questions about emotional intelligence. They should be asked more questions about trauma-based sentencing. There's no reason that the public should not demand that the people who are in public service are there for the right reasons.
Maybe you should be teaching a course for some judges.
I'd love to. I don't know if they'd listen, but
No. Well, I have to thank you so much for taking the time out. I know this is a Sunday that you're taking time out of your own personal time to do this with me today. It has been a joy talking with you. I love seeing what's going on in Ohio, and I'm going to be looking up some of these programs myself. I do lots of work with people here that are in the Maine State Prison, and we're always looking for new ideas and progressive people that are out there, and I put you in that category.
Oh, well, I appreciate it. This is, I told you earlier that I wanted to be a judge when I was 8 years old, and I tell people at that point it's not really a choice. I think it really is a calling. And when I was chosen out of the hat for reentry court, I thought, this must be why I'm here, because the odds of me doing this or even figuring out how to do it are so small. And it's become such a phenomenon. And as I also said earlier, I know that so far in my career, 650 years have not been done in prison. And that means more to me than anything else. And of all the awards I've received, I received an award from the residents at the Grafton Prison, the NAACP chapter, Coretta Scott King Award. And people go, why was that the most important? I said, because you know what? Some of those men I sent to prison. And we still can have a conversation with each other. And they respect me, and they know I respect them, and they respect the work that I do, and they know I believe in them. Even if they don't come in my program, I tell all the people in my classes, you need us, you call us. We'll help you any way we can. It's my life's work. It's what means the most to me.
I think the most important thing about an award like that, it's because you see them. And they are often considered the invisible people once they're behind the doors.
Well, I would finish with this, that we have drug courts, we have domestic violence courts, we have all these other things that are pre-trial courts and diversion. And they get a lot of attention. As I say, those are so sexy, everybody pays attention to them. Nobody cares about reentry court. I feel the stigma, not obviously in the same way as they do, but I feel the pushback, and I feel the stigma and the ignoring us and the pushing us aside, because I'm dealing with convicted felons. It's like, it's okay, it's interesting she does that work, but maybe we're not going to really do any special programming on it for reentry month, and we're not going to really pay attention to it, and we're not going to come to the graduation. And it's interesting because it always reminds me, when it happens, it reminds me of, if I'm feeling this, I have to be really conscious of what they're feeling.
Exactly. And I understand that stigma because I work with death row inmates. So, and you do get a lot of pushback from some people as far as, but we all have our callings and somebody has to do the work. So thank goodness there's some of us out here that can, right?
Right. And we're finding each other. That's the most important.
Exactly. Part. And sharing the information so we can learn from each other.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think we're going to end here. I want to thank you so much for being here today. It's been really great to have you. So
thank you so much.
Hold on just a moment. I'm going to close out and I'll talk to you in a second.
Okay, thanks.
I want to thank all my listeners for joining us today. I want to remind you we've been talking with Judge Nancy Margaret Russo, and this has been a great conversation. I'm very thankful to her for joining us, and I hope that you have all learned something yourselves today. So, as I always close out, don't forget, pick up that book. It can take you somewhere.
You have been listening to The Prison Pod, a podcast not just for those in prison but for anyone who has been affected by incarceration. Ms. Valerie would love for you to write to her with your questions, comments, and show ideas. The address is Prison Pod, Post Office Box 294, Orono, Maine. 04473. Remember, reading opens doors, so pick up that book.
Hello, everyone. My name is Noah Asher, and I'm the author of Chaos, Overcoming the Overwhelming. This Christian book is all about helping people find purpose in their pain and in their past. I remember what it was like to be behind bars. So I wrote this book to provide hope, help, and humor for the men and women in prison around the world. All proceeds of this book are used on the outside to make sure it stays free for you on the inside. So check out Chaos, Overcoming the Overwhelming by me, Noah Asher.